before my great-grandfather, great-great-great-great-grandfather came here. You have to close your eyes. This valley was a desert. There was no Jordanelle, there was no Deer Creek, there was no Strawberry. And so you had in the springtime a massive flood of water that would come through the Provo Canyon, and it would fill up Utah Lake, and it would fill up all the way up to 12th West in Orem some years, and it would fluctuate massively with water, right? That's why we can see Indian tribes grinding stones and arrowheads at different sections and different levels from 12th West all the way up. When my great-great-great-grandfather, Shadrach, it's a cool name, Holdaway, came here, he was a part of the Mormon battalion, and he was in Nauvoo. He's a Mormon settler, joined the Mormon battalion, and then came out west, and he was a friend with Brigham Young. He was the first Mormon to pay his tithing in gold, which is kind of cool, because he found gold in California. And when he came here, he settled in a home over here in Vineyard, and the slough was a major section because it had all the water. It had the water source, so where they could hunt, where they could fish. It had clean water streams and everything like that. Well, as Shadrach came, this is 50 years before the United States was created. This is 1850, 1860. They were obviously, this is the Mexican states of America, and he would come down and speak with the Native American tribes. So would other groups. Brigham Young would come and meet with him, and they would come down and they would talk on the lake shore. Wakara and others were there. There's not a lot of written about a lot of these conversations. All I know through family history is that 3 LDS prophets came, 9 LDS apostles came, and they came and just talked about this county. And they were negotiating statehood for the United States. When they negotiated statehood, Brigham Young was kind of political in what he did. If you guys read through the history, he wanted to control the state of Utah, how the government was set up, and who the county commissioners were going to be. So for the first county commissioners in Utah County, they were not elected. They were appointed, kind of like a church calling. There was not a lot of separation of church and state at that point, right? So we weren't a state. We were a territory. We were kind of, hey, what's going on, right? Where are we at? And Shadrach's son, my great-great-great-grandfather, Amos, was appointed to be the first one of 3 county commissioners of Utah County. And as county commissioner, he was selected to set up a government, right? To set up the courts, set up the buildings, set up public works, and figure things out. Well, the biggest thing that they needed to do in this desert valley was to bring water to it. And the main water source was through Provo Canyon. So Amos brought water through the Provo River all the way through that green, used to be this green tube on the north side of the canyon. My grandfather didn't put in the green tube, that's made out of plastic. He put in the wood one that was right before that. And the reason why it was at that level was because they needed to get it to the highland area of northern Utah County and to water all of the farmlands, and then it would drop down into the lake bottom canal, and it was divided up into water shares. So each farmer would get a time of day in which they got water to water their grass, or sorry, not their grass, well, their grass sometimes, cherry trees, peach trees. Orem used to be huge into that. Provo did as well. But each person would get a water share, right? As we directed that water, this became a section of, we didn't need it as much. It wasn't the only source of water, or Provo River wasn't the only source. And we dramatically changed Utah County. We greened it up. We got trees. We were able to, it wasn't sagebrush. And so what happened with all of the wild buffalo, all of the wild deer, elk, moose, horses, they all left. They were not cleaning Utah Lake. The cleanliness of the lake changed because there was no source. When my great-grandfather, Amos's son, Walter, came here, we were pioneers and we changed it. We decided that we would put fences across Utah Lake, and we fenced it off into grazing. And for 100 years, that maintained the ecosystem of Utah Lake. And what I mean by that is it would be a natural grazing. It wasn't herds or anything, but they would naturally graze it. And that naturally grazing is very important to the ecosystem. Whether it be the elk, deer, or buffalo before it, or just Holstein cows, what that does is it opens up, when you eat off the vegetation, it sends that vegetation through a stomach. And 90% of the energy or the nutrients that is in that vegetation get burned up. When you don't send that vegetation through a stomach to break it down, 100% of it just lays down. And it creates a really bad effect. It creates algae blooms. That nutrients will lay down in water, and then it'll just, kind of like making beer, and I'm a Mormon, so I don't really know a lot of that, but it lays down in water and it then sends that nutrients into our streams and our waterways. And then if you look at all of where the high concentration of algae bloom, we have so much nutrients. Why do we have all of this nutrients? How do we get rid of it? And so there's a lot, so working with the state, there's a lot of nutrients that's being run off on golf courses or different people putting nutrients onto their lawn. But they actually look at it and they go just around Utah Lake. There's a massive amount of vegetation that's not, there's no process to eat this up. And so my grandparents, for that 100 years, this section of all the way around Utah Lake was grazed and it was open. Mayor Kaufusi of Provo, when she came down, she was like, I remember looking for arrowheads and grinding stones to this property. I remember putting our boat in right here. Is this all just closed off? Like, what happened to this? Just from 40 years ago. So when she was in high school and in college. So what happened so from that point, in 1970, the state of Utah made a decision on the level of Utah Lake. So Utah Lake changed from being a lake to it's a reservoir. And the reservoir is over in Saratoga Springs. A lot of people don't know that. We regulate Utah Lake by Deer Creek, Strawberry, Jordanelle. We decide how much water goes into the lake, and we decide how much water goes out of Utah Lake. And we don't allow any houses. We don't allow it to go all the way up to 12th West. We control it within about a matter of a foot and a half. Also in 1970, when they decided the level of the lake, the Salt Lake water owners that own the water rights of Utah Lake, they dictate the level of that. Isn't that strange? Our water rights come from up there. So if you don't know the whole history, you don't really know how to solve the problem, right? So because I'm 7th generation Holdaway and I've heard all of these stories, I was like, this is completely easy to solve. So anyway, they have the water rights there. So in 1970, when they controlled the level of the lake, the state came in and they said, we own to this property line. And all of the farmers that are around the lake did not agree with that. They came in and they said, no, 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 no. There's no way that land is going to be underwater. So they organized the Utah Lake Bottoms Association, and they sued the state of Utah to say, we own this property. This was in 1970. So in 1970, all of the farmers on Vineyard, Orem, and Provo that had fences, that were grazing it ever so often, getting the vegetation that was there, they slowly removed their cows off of the property while it was in lawsuit, and they stopped grazing it. Well, the deer didn't come back, the buffalo didn't come back, the elk didn't come back, and nobody grazed it. It just closed off. And you need to remember, in 1850 and 1860, when they got here, they were here before the state. So So they put up their fence posts well before, like 50 years prior. And then when they became a state, what the state did, which is common in every western state, they identified every lake, and the state put a fence around every lake. So if you go to Jordanelle, there's a fence around it. If you go to Payson Lakes, American Fork Canyon, you're going over a cattle guard every single time you go into that lake, and there is a grazing program connected to that lake. That's why you don't have a vegetation problem. That's why they're clean. That's why they're open. The only lake in the state of Utah that does not have a grazing program is Utah Lake. And the only reason why that exists is because the founders, or the people, or the pioneers that got here, were here 50 years before the state. And there's been this argument about how to do that. Does that make sense? So is anyone seeing the problem or anything? So what does not having a grazing program do? I already talked about the water quality, putting in the algae bloom, but number two, it completely affects the ecosystem that goes on at the lake. So when you have a grazing program, and whether that be artificial or natural, cattle, elk, and moose, they go to the water source first because they need to drink. When they go to drink, they eat the vegetation that's closest to them. So they usually, as that stream and river shrinks, they clean that. They're the lawnmower of that. And as that grows, they're the lawnmower, and they keep the edges. They trim the edges clean of that. And what that does is it affects our migratory birds. Migratory birds.
Right on cue. Perfect timing.
Wow.
I'm glad I'm filming this.
I honestly want to know where that's from. So that is a migratory bird. That's a sandhill crane. I don't know where it's at, but we have Canadian geese. We have all types of wood ducks and everything. They come in and they use the slough. Well, this slough is tiny right now. It's all been closed off, and you have only all these really small streams. A year ago, you wouldn't have even seen these streams because we've gone in with a Marshmaster, a tractor, and we've driven the streams just to open them up. Because it used to be just weeds that went over the top of them, and you couldn't even see that there were streams. And we've identified where those springs are, and they were just closed up. 100% vegetation. Didn't even know where they were. When I was a kid, I knew where they were, so I came out there with the state, and I was like, it's gonna be right there, I think, within that section. And we drove around looking for it, and we've opened up quite a few of them. So, but by bringing in all of the migratory birds, and our migratory birds are going north and south, and they need to have a stop off, and they have to have one here in Utah Lake, because if they stop off at Great Salt Lake, they're gonna die. It's too salty, they have the tar pits there, and it's too far of a journey. And when these have closed off, to kind of help you understand, Utah Lake freezes during that time for a big section, about a month and a half. And if that closes off and freezes, and the springs are not, these springs right here are not available, they have to make too far of a trip, and they'll just go to the Great Salt Lake, and it's salty and it doesn't freeze. And so we've got to have this open up so that the migratory birds can stop here, they can rest, they can get energy, they can get full bellies, and then they can make it on their trip. The other reason why, though, is if we do not have open waterways, we do not have the eagles, bald eagles, golden eagles, osprey, none of those, if they do not have an open water source year-round, if it's just freezing off, they too cannot live. So they've got to have open streams like this where they can come in and fish the river, or they can come in and attack the ducks and the geese, because there are predatory birds that come and eat those as well, like your red-tailed hawks and whatnot. And so anyway, this was closed off. So 4 years ago, I read the newspaper about how Utah Lake had put in, the Utah Lake Commission was organized, and they were like, we're gonna study this whole thing out. And I was like, I have 150 years of history that I could prove to you. Let me talk about my great-grandfather. Let me talk about all of this. And can I just show you how it went bad in 150 years due to man? And a lot of it has to do with my family and not being good stewards of it. A lot of it has to do with the state and the argument and the political fight. But what's been amazing is that both sides have fought and nobody won. And what a horrible legacy that is. Like, this used to be such a gem, but yet now no one even goes to Utah Lake. It's full of mosquitoes. And that was one thing I was going to tell you. There's two other things that need to be solved, which is when that vegetation grows and we have stagnant water, we've had other weeds that have come in just in the last 10 years because they love stagnant water, and it's the Phragmites. It's the really tall weed that's right here. You don't see any out there because we sprayed last fall, and it's not going to come into our waterways because we have those open for our ducks and geese. But this whole thing was just closed off, and the problem with that is that when I was a kid, Utah Lake was not a mosquito infested. I mean, I remember coming down on our property, and I know where people didn't graze, it was just full of mosquitoes. But everyone would come to our section and they would go, well, wait, where's the like, why are the mosquitoes not here? What's going on? Like, oh, they don't. And I'm like, well, where would they live? What habitat would they live in? If there's no standing water, if fish can't swim up, the minnows can't swim up into the water to kill them, then they have this amazing breeding ground where they can just reproduce, right? If we have the cattle grazers go through the water and eat all of that, the fish will work to and go upstream, and they'll eat all of the mosquito larvae. And so when I saw the plan of, we're gonna dump $5 million of pesticide and we're gonna fly over the top of the program, we're just gonna fly over the top, I was like, whoa, that's a lot of pesticide. And we're gonna spend $2.5 million and we're just gonna mow it. And I was like, whoa, okay, let's talk about this. Let's embrace and let's create a master plan. So because I work in government and I work with the National Association of Counties and I work with the National League of Cities, and I know intergovernmental agreements, I knew I needed to get everybody on the same page. And I also knew, as a steward of the Holdaway family, that these people that have been sued for 30 years of this lawsuit, we needed to put that to bed. How can we, what is the step forward? And my grandparents, Robert and Kumora Holdaway, looked at the property, and I said, what is the legacy that we're gonna leave? We own the property. Oh, I should end. The state came back after 30 years of litigation and they said, that's right, this isn't underwater. It is semi-underwater. There's parts that are and there's parts that aren't. We'll just turn it over to you. Well, there's a problem with that because in 2001, when the milk price dropped, all of the dairy farmers went out of business in Vineyard. The milk price, the federal government price, went down from like $18 to $11 per hundredweight. And so that's one of the main reasons why all of my uncles sold Vineyard. You know, it used to be 8 farms of my uncle Holdaways, and we've all sold different sections, but there's just not any money. So economically, I thought that people would come and put fences and set up some sort of natural grazing program. But it's economically, there's not enough money. And the reason why is to put in new fences, the county requires a permit. And the city, hey, you gotta come in and put this fence. Well, to put a fence next to a golf course or to multi-million-dollar homes, cities are not gonna allow for that. And then they've got, oh, you gotta put a really nice fence. Well, a cattle person isn't gonna make enough money to build a solid fence and recuperate his or her money to bring them in. They own the cattle rate, but I mean, this whole property probably makes about $2,000 a month. But you're gonna, just in the section we put in, it was $60,000 for that fence. So no one's gonna make that personal investment into it. And so there's a lot of federal money that's out there. And so what I had to do was, I made phone calls to the 25 different government entities that touch this property. And I know that sounds really stupid, but there are 25 government entities that have a right to this property. You have the Utah Department of Water Quality, you have the Utah Department of Air Quality, You have Utah Lake Commission, Vineyard City, Orem City, Utah County. The federal government owns a section of this property. The Interior Secretary, obviously, you know. So, I mean, it just became really, really daunting, and that's how I understood, like, if someone's not master planning this together, and we don't get all of these different portions, we're just gonna walk away from the lake. And so I found an amazing partner in Eric Ellis of the Utah Lake Commission, and I said, everyone has a different interest in the property. What I mean by that is the eagle people, they have an interest. So, okay, what is your interest? Where are the eagles? Why do they need to be protected? And how much money can you put into solving the problem? Utah, the state of Utah, they want to put a bike path from Saratoga Springs, where the Jordan River Parkway ends, and they have a bike path from the Provo River all the way up Provo River, and they want to connect that. Great, there's money for there. All right, well, you're not going to go down the bike path if there's weeds on it. Women aren't going to engage it. They're not going to engage it with, so I found the money for the mosquito money. I was like, hey, you're going to dump mosquito money onto this. Cattle will get rid of 90% of your population. Can we take that money? Can we change it? Can you come to a meeting? Can we go? Utah State Department of Agriculture, UVU with the archaeology department, and knowing that there's arrowheads and grinding stones on the property. There's 9 different property owners that are there. And so 3 years ago, I just said, what the heck, I don't have a hobby. Let's get together once a week and let's hammer out quietly without the public knowing. We're not making any promises, but we've got to master plan this so that we can get access to the lake. Right now, nobody uses Utah Lake. You have Linden Boat Harbor, American Folk Boat Harbor, Provo. You can't engage it. There's not a trail through it. And so how can we change that? So anyway, that's talking about the problem here. Let's go and talk about the solution at the next step. So any questions real quick about the problem?
Well, I was just curious. You say there are 9 different property owners out here, and you were talking about the fence. Is any of the, obviously the golf course is in Vineyard.
The golf course is in Orem.
Orem.
Yeah.
But
the golf course is in Vineyard and Orem.
Okay. And so is this like an unincorporated part of Utah County?
Right here where we're standing, this is the future parking lot for Wacaro Way. This is University Parkway. It ends right there. And this will be a massive parking spot.
But who owns
the trail
this?
will go through this.
Is this part
so
of Orem
on that
City,
side of the
Vineyard,
river,
or the county?
On that side of the river is my father. On this right here, it's the state for about 80 feet. That's the federal government right there. There's no fence lines between any of it. And then after the federal government, it turns into the Johnsons. And then it goes to unincorporated Utah County. What?
Newell Johnson?
Newell Johnson. His farm's right over there.
Okay.
And then you've got, and then after unincorporated Utah County, it turns into a property owner that Cherry Hill Conservation Project. They're right there, and then right after that is the fish. What are the fish? The
suckers, the June suckers.
June Sucker Recovery Program will be our neighbors of the south.
And I'm interested to hear how you're working in partnership. I would think some way with the guys. They're going to do the islands in the middle of the lake.
Yeah, so they have not become official, but they have reached out and done a tour. They don't know what's going to happen with this. They wanted us to be a portion of that, but we got started. We're 100% funded through existing government dollars. We don't need.
I heard that they were 3 years into their 3-year project.
Yeah, I don't know. Like, they've come in and learned, and I tell them kind of what we're doing on the lake shore. What they're doing in the middle of the lake, that doesn't have anything to do with us. So,
well, except for the edge of the lake, because my understanding was part of their purchase price of the lake was going to be actual cash, and then remedying the problem with the bottom feeders and the thrush, the frag type,
right.
Whatever they
there were some things, but we had already solved the problem before they got started.
But
so
just for this portion.
We're going to Saratoga Springs with this, so we're going to do Saratoga to Provo in phases. So,
but the rest of the lake is in jeopardy.
Right. So what they want to do, it's a little bit different. So these are just the 25 that are engaged here, but But I mean, I know theirs is a little bit different. I mean, they're like building houses, and there's like a financial, the state is giving them money. With this, there is no money maker. This is government entities going through and looking at and having people that owned the land before donating the land and really turning it over to public access and public use. So there's not like, at the end of this tour, you're not going to see like some condo development or or something. Not that it's bad. I mean, I know I'm talking to real estate, but there's just not. This is just, these are all the properties that were.
Start farming it again. I mean, if you let somebody go out there and graze in parts of it, wouldn't that eliminate the need for the pesticides?
So when we brought in the land, when we brought in all the different conflicting reasons, it is in what's called a wetland status. So even though for the vast majority of time it will not be underwater, there are times when if we were to get a flood, and I know right now it doesn't think it because everyone's crying about how our reservoirs are all empty, but let's say one time we had 5 or 6 years of rain and all of our reservoirs were clean and they couldn't regulate Utah County, then this isn't a floodplain, so they wouldn't allow for any growth. And also for the water quality, we don't want to bring farmers in to break up the natural habitat of what's going on. And so the landowners do not own developmental rights with this property. They own grazing rights. So my dad owns grazing rights and all the other uncles own. So when I went to them and said, hey, would you be willing to donate your grazing right? You know, would you be willing to, what are you going to do with it? Right now you just have weeds. Well, yeah, what else am I going to do with it? I can graze, but the fences are too expensive. How do I solve that? Would you be willing to be a part of a solution? Would you be willing to allow for a right-of-way and a path? You know, what does that look like? And if you're not willing to, you know, because we spend millions of dollars in fighting all of this weed problem, your grazing right, is it worth $50,000? Let's just buy it from you so we can get our path through. So that's kind of the legal side of each property owner of trying to solve this to get it in. Almost all of the landowners have donated their land with no money transaction. It's more of a, and you got to realize there's an incentive, right? The Johnsons are going to be selling their property soon. Do they want to sell their property with a mosquito infested, disgusting problem that they're backed up to? Or do they want to have a clean park, 1,000-acre park that's been clean, no mosquitoes, and fishing that's available? When do you want to sell your property? When we fix the problem or before? So it's been more of a, hey, let's work with them. So that's why we got the $4.5 million from the state.
I got one other question. I sold a house up behind Thanksgiving Point that's on the river, and my buyers were interested about if that could ever flood. And doing some research, we found out that there's an agreement in place that whoever operates the little reservoir head that leads into the Jordan River cannot let water go in there that's going to put in jeopardy the house.
Correct. So there's only so much.
If it's one of those 8 years of rain, and we're flowing here, and is that agreement in jeopardy?
No. No, and so none of those agreements are adjusted by whether it be the Utah Lake up there or the Great Salt Lake water users. The amount of water that they would throw down in an emergency is just a massive amount of water. I mean, they don't allow them to grow I mean, you probably look at that house and you're like, wow, that's really, really far away. I don't know if you've ever seen Provo River when it's at its full peak. Even when it's sending a ton, it's not a big footprint, right?
But you know, I have been out there and looked at those condos that are on the water's edge, and years ago there was water up to the grass, and now the water's, you know, 30 yards away. So I don't think it has to be really wet.
So that's all controlled now by computers and meteorologists and how much, I mean, obviously they're trying to keep as much water as high. You always try and keep as much water as high as you can, right? Whether that be up in Strawberry, then Deer Creek. So yeah, but I mean, if we ever get into that problem, all I know is we're retaining as much water as we can. Like, we are not letting anything out, and we're like saying don't use. If we just wanted to open up the floodgates, I mean, you could empty Deer Creek within a week and a half. You could really, if you wanted to, and still not overburden Provo River. There's that. And also, you could run it through all of my great-grandfather's old drain. I mean, you could send it out different ways. If Provo River were ever to overgo, they could send it through the Lake Bottom Canal. They could send it through all different types of canals that are still, just to get it to the lake if they wanted to.
Well, let's get to your solution.
Yeah, let's get there and we'll